This is Upfront on the Voice of America. My name is Jackson Vonganyi. Thank you so much for joining us today. Here in Studio 48, we have a special guest, my friend Nina Oduro. Nina, welcome.
Thank you.
I mean, we've done this many times before. It's good to see you.
Good to see you
How
too.
are you?
So glad to be here.
You're coming off a big moment in your professional career. Let's talk about the Black Women in Food Summit that you just had recently.
Yeah.
What was that about and how did it go?
So amazing. We just wrapped it up. It was here in Washington, D.C., convened Black women across the food system. So we're talking anywhere from agriculture all the way to chefs, all the way to people that are making consumer packaged goods and products. So very much diverse, and media even, coming together and focused on food and interacting with each other, some for the first time. Oftentimes these women never get the chance to even meet each other, let alone build relationships. So this summit was all about that. It was so transformational. I think that's the word that really encapsulates the energy that was in the room, knowing that these women are now able to be connected and then use those connections to leverage their own work and to grow professionally.
Right, and Nina, I've known you for so many years, over a decade, and 8 years ago you started one, I guess what one would call a transformational organization here in the Washington D.C. area, Dine Diaspora. What is it about? What inspired you to start it?
Yeah, so Dine Diaspora has evolved since all those years ago, and one of the ways in which we've evolved is that Black Women in Food Summit, what I just talked about. But way back then, we didn't know that that was going to be what we were also integrating into the business. Dine Diaspora started as a way to actually connect people, and food became the mechanism that we chose to do it. Oftentimes here in DC, there's so many folks from different walks of life. They meet each other, but DC can be a little bit transient. People come in and out. People are really focused on their career. So we wanted people to come together and have very meaningful relationships. And so we started these dinners that enable that and really brought African diaspora chefs to showcase their work. Often these chefs are in kitchens where they're not able to even do their own menus, let alone use the ingredients from the places that they've always loved, their upbringing. And so our opportunities for them to do it were through these dinners. And over the years, we've evolved to really listening to those chefs and the talent themselves, those people within the food industry that are really shaping the way we experience food. And we've been able to add more services and more opportunities for people to engage in the culinary experience of the African diaspora.
And, you know, Dine Diaspora is one of the few organizations at the time that was highlighting these Black chefs, whether they're African diaspora chefs or African American chefs. And I remember coming to one of your early events at the time when I was an influencer. I don't know if I'm still considered as an influencer, but 8 years down the road, talk to us about the evolution of the DC food scene.
So DC has always been rich with culture and always been rich with people that are inquisitive about culture from all experiences, all backgrounds, all races, all ethnicities. However, DC is very rich in the African diaspora. Not only do we have African Americans, we have a vast array of Africans, Caribbean culture, all here in one place. And that allows for a really amazing celebration of food through the African diaspora lens. And there's a number of restaurants that showcase that now. Even back then when we started, there were so many. And you know what? Business is hard, and restaurant businesses are hard. If you're lucky to be in business in a restaurant after 5 years, yet we have some amazing African restaurants that have actually sustained that. One of them is Bukum, which is Nigerian and Ghanaian. 20 years. Can you imagine?
Absolutely.
20 years of having a restaurant here in DC.
Recently, they're still there. They're still working.
Still thriving.
They're thriving, absolutely.
And honestly, part of a journey and a history of what it means to be Black and African in DC, they hold that experience, right? Apio has been here for way more than 5 years. So we're really, Apio is also Ghanaian, but we have some new additions. Moi Moi is also mixing African cuisine with African American heritage cuisine, which is Southern, honestly, right? And that isn't actually too far away from African culture, and yet it's been evolved. And I think we all need to experience it and think about it in ways in which we understand those connections of what it means to have African American cuisine and where it came from, which is actually through the transatlantic slave trade. And so we're all interconnected in that way, and there's these restaurants that are really doing their part to tell their stories through food.
And food is the one connector really that is universal. How would you describe or compare the DC food scene to other big cities like New York that is also very diverse?
Yeah, so I think there's very interesting to compare. Let's say DC is robust, and like I said, it can be transient, and yet the people that actually live here and stay here really are able to create restaurants and opportunity, even experiences, pop-ups, whatever it is, to bring forth their culture. But you also have to think about DC being so ingrained in government and international development work. So you always have this audience that's really coming
That's
to
curious.
embrace. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
They want to discover new
Right.
cultures.
I think
and
that
new
can be hard in
experiences.
other cities, but
Right.
also, the cost of, actually, having a restaurant in the center of town is different. In New York, what I'm seeing now is more African restaurants emerging in the city. This is phenomenal. 5 years ago, we couldn't say that. Lego's restaurant in Manhattan, not just in Manhattan, in Times Square.
Absolutely.
This is actually revolutionary for Black people and African diaspora people to have that in Times Square, for us to be able to get jollof or whatever we're looking for, right? There's other restaurants that are popping up near it.
Chef Thiam's restaurants.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. So it's, it's Kwame Onuachi's restaurant. These are not just restaurants that are popping up. There's been restaurants for decades, but they're really making a claim and a stake into the real estate, saying that we deserve to be at the center as well. And our foods are just as good as any other cultures that have had those opportunities to be at the forefront of what it means to be American cuisine. Well, right now, I think African cuisine, African diaspora cuisine, Black cuisine is American cuisine.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing as showing up along the streets, where we can enjoy it with all the other foods that are just as accessible.
Aside from Bukom and Appeal, what are some of the restaurants, other restaurants that you would recommend to somebody who's trying to make that entry into African food, just to understand a little bit about African food culture here in the Washington, D.C. area?
I would say it depends what you like, right? So if you're new to the game, you might want to try something that's a little bit more fusion. So Melange, D.C., that is one that uses burgers as a way to, introduce you to African cuisine through the spices, right? So I would say pick your challenge. One way I mentioned before is also doing a fusion. I say the gateway is fusion, right? Put one foot in and then discover,
right.
And then I think you can never not like it. So it will help you kind of get immersed. And once you really get in, the real places to eat aren't in just the restaurants. It's going to be someone's living room. So keep going, and you're going to be invited, hopefully, to someone's home where they're really doing dishes that you may not even get to even hear about in the restaurants.
Talk to us about your personal experience as a young Ghanaian growing up here in the U.S., in the Washington, D.C. area. What kind of foods did you eat?
I think we did a little bit of everything. And I think what would really paints the picture for me is what holidays were like. So, Christmas, Thanksgiving, especially Thanksgiving, which is very an American a holiday.
Tradition, yes.
Yeah, my parents are Ghanaian and didn't really understand what it was. And that meant that I really value that they didn't totally understand, because that meant that they didn't have to hold this strict narrative about what it means, what to eat. And so on our Thanksgiving table, we would have everything from, a meat pie, a jollof rice, all these little things that are celebratory for our culture as Ghanaian. And then they would add American elements too.
Some turkey
would be there, because you can, I can go to school without saying that I ate turkey on Thanksgiving. So my parents would make sure that there was some form of turkey, even though they weren't really interested. And so I think for me, it's the beauty of learning about different cultures while retaining your own and not, leaving it behind.
What has been the experience for you as a food entrepreneur? I guess I like to call you a food ambassador, an African food ambassador. What has the experience been for you? Like how many years, 8 years later as an entrepreneur?
It hasn't been a road full of roses or whatever the saying goes, but it really has been a learning journey. I think what has inspired me to continue despite some of the challenges is the opportunity to learn and build relationships with people. Over time, I've gotten to know such amazing talent in the food industry, people that are really really, I would say, the really major ambassadors of our cuisine. They're taking the ingredients from our nations that may be lesser known. So fonio is one, getting to know folks like Chef Pierre Chem in Senegal, or Fatmata Binta in Ghana by way of Sierra Leone. These are people that are really looking at some of the things that we've maybe not even in Africa, not really immersed in using a lot, and bringing it to the forefront of what it means to use African cuisines that are really going to shape our world in a healthier way. For me, as a business owner, I think my business has evolved over time as things have evolved. We started doing a lot of in-person engagements, but then later on shifted to social media and leveraging partnerships with, Facebook, World Food Program, all of these companies that are looking to leverage social media to connect with a vast audience.
And speaking of social media, what has been the role of social media in amplifying or elevating or highlighting some of these foods that most people didn't even know about?
Incredibly important social media has been. Social media, I think, is one of the easiest, most democratized ways for food entrepreneurs to use to connect with people. Now, you may not know what it tastes like, but your eyes will do some work for you. Absolutely. As you begin to. So many restaurants.
And the colors, African food colors.
It's just beautiful, yes. Right? And so many restaurants are, have really leveraged social media to get to the next level, to reach customers, but also individuals. The food industry isn't just about restaurants. We have chefs, we have farmers, we have so many people that are contributing to a vast food system, and social media is the way that they're actually being able to educate audiences about what this food system entails. And I think that is a major way in which we're kind of breaking down what the food system looks like. It's not just a bunch of white male chefs that you see, but it's a lot of women. It has
liberalized the space.
Yeah, and I think it has more to do, right? It's not the only space, but it allows individuals to really participate in representation and connection with people.
And stake their claim. Let's go back to the Black Women in Food Summit. Black Women in Food is an initiative of Dine Diaspora, just to clarify for our viewers. What are some of the conversations you are having, especially regarding the challenges that these food entrepreneurs, specifically women, face as they, grow their businesses?
Yeah, and this is a really critical, interesting topic when it comes to the food industry across the world. Actually, while women are often in the homes, you think of your mom, you think of your grandmother making food. In the professional food world, men tend to have the higher advantage. What it means to be a professional chef is often given to the status of males, and that to me is a problem. Women's representation in the food industry should be vast and equal to men, and so that's where the Black Women in Food initiative is born out of. Out of our work with brands on telling stories through food, we actually faced the challenge of working with men consistently, because that was coveted. And yet we said, in order to really have equality, in order to really dismantle these systems that are positioning men at the forefront, we need to change what we're doing. So that's where we started the Black Women in Food initiative. Today it has several pieces, one of which is a recognition and awards program for women across the world, Black women across the world. The second is an access to capital component, where we have grants going to Black women-owned businesses in the food industry. And then the other is resources and networks such as the summit and other types of resources that we can give the women to elevate and really build their work in the food industry.
So this is also a platform where women food entrepreneurs can apply for the grants.
Definitely. So we have one grant coming. We just gave out one last year, which is really exciting. But we have a whole huge grant coming this year, sponsored by Uber Eats, for Black women-owned restaurants. And this, everyone look out for the announcements. We'll be really announcing a number of grants for women to really focus on efforts that they can make in their business, restaurants specifically, to grow.
So what does it take to be a food entrepreneur?
It takes choosing. It takes believing in yourself. It takes passion. Now, one thing I love about the food industry is that you don't all have to have a certain credential. you can, yes, go the school route, but you can choose any day in your life, whether you're 50 years old, whether you're 10 years old, to begin exploring food in a number of facets. And to me, that accessibility is what the world needs. There's so many areas in the culinary industry, not culinary, but in other sectors, where there's so many barriers, barriers to education, barriers to so many barriers
to access to funding.
Exactly. But for the food industry, it is, there's so many different elements, and some of the elements are so much more accessible. You can start in your home. You can start with the people that you know. And that, to me, is critical in a society where there's so much inequality, and yet people need ways, creative ways, or any way to be able to access opportunity. In
terms of representation regionally, on the continent, West Africa, South Africa, North Africa, East Africa, in the diaspora here in the US, where do you find more representation?
You know, it depends where you are in the US, right? So I think here in DC, West African representation and East Africa through Ethiopia is vast, right? So it depends where you're going. And so I can't necessarily say one dominates over the other. But as far as in food, I think Ethiopians are making so much headway in getting their products into stores, into the mainstream. And West Africans have done tremendous work in getting their work into the mainstream as well, both on the talent side, where we're talking about chefs being visible, but also on the product side, right? Getting their products on shelves everywhere. Now, one thing I love about the African diaspora is we'll always have make the opportunity ourselves. We have our own stores, we have our own grocery stores, we have our own restaurants. But what I'm seeing now today is that we want our things to be accessible at the Whole Foods, at the whatever grocery store people go to. Right. And that's what we're seeing, more and more people working to place their products to the broader communities.
I'm glad you brought that up, because when you think about food entrepreneur, people are thinking about restaurateurs, you know, opening up a restaurant and people come and sit down and you make food for them. But there are other aspects to being a food entrepreneur, including taking stuff in, you know, creating stuff that you can put in on the shelves of these major grocery stores, right?
Yes. Yes. So one entrepreneur that we are working with and know has a drink called berry bissap. So using bissap, you know, one of the common ingredients in Africa, to really position her products in front of American audiences. We all know it, it's beautiful, but we also want access, right? What it would be like to just go to a grocery store and get that, and, you know, have it taste just the same that we remember. So we have so many women that we also are in our community working on products like this, and we're rooting for them, because why is it that when you go into the store you don't see yourself represented on the shelf? That shouldn't be that way. And women are at the forefront of a lot of this work and deserve to see themselves uniquely placed, but also reaping the benefits monetarily in order to be able to support their communities.
Now, I can't let you go without you know, having you talk a little bit about some of the items indigenous to Africa, like jollof rice, that we've seen prepackaged or repackaged in these grocery stores, but are not being produced by African food entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
And I've seen people side-eyeing them.
Yeah.
What do you think about that?
Well, one thing I think that is we need to be inquisitive about who makes our food, where it comes from, et cetera, you know, the whole thing. Sometimes, not sometimes, I think we need to hold these companies responsible for exposing those things. Who are they getting the recipe from? Maybe they are paying someone for their recipe, but I think it's important for us to have the knowledge of the full story, and those stories are what makes us want to even support it. Put anything on your shelf doesn't mean that everyone, the African diaspora, is going to like it and want it. Tell a story and maybe we will. And I think that's what we do, right? Don't leave us out. You can't just place us on a shelf and ask everyone to run. You have to bring us with you. You have to show us, because we have been so underrepresented in spaces like food that it's really critical. It's not a choice. We have to be the face of our foods around the world.
Because representation matters.
It does.
Nina Oduro, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you.
Good to talk to you.